Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's ThinkIn. So my name is Phoebe. I work on the ThinkIn team at Tortoise. I was previously a student ambassador for Tortoise, and I joined the team last year. So tonight's ThinkIn is part of our Battle for Truth series. We've kind of taken it as a longer running series. We've looked at big tech, we've looked at council culture, we've tried to answer a very big question, is anything even true anymore? But tonight we're focusing in a little bit more, and we're kind of looking towards local journalism. There's some people that may have joined us from Clubhouse. We just ran a little green room, which is really interesting, and we kind of started to have the conversations about the role of local news, the structures of local news. But we also have some really great speakers who've joined us today. From a kind of across the news landscape in the UK, and it's going to be, I'm really excited for this conversation. If you haven't been to a ThinkIn before, I know that we've got some kind of new people that we've asked to come along, especially some local news editors. It's pretty easy. There's the chat function. Please use it. Zav's going to be there. Zav Greenwood, he's one of our reporters here at Tortoise. He's also done the slides that you would have seen in that initial little bit, and we're going to come to Zav later to kind of give his experience, and he also has his own experience of kind of on the ground reporting that I'd really like to hear about. But yeah, we're going to kind of kick off, and raise hand function. I'm sure you guys know this already. It's been a year. It's been a year of Zoom, but please do raise your hand. We want to come to as many people as possible. The kind of idea of it is that we don't ask questions. We kind of share experience. We share ideas. But yeah, we're going to kind of get started. So to start off the conversation, I wanted to start from my own experience of local journalism, which was probably the best example was my student paper at university. So I was digital editor. It was a small paper. Our circulation was tiny. It was all on campus. But we reported on things that really mattered to the students. We reported on, student union elections. We reported on how much money the university was spending on biscuits for meetings. It was far too much. It was a really important voice to the community, or I like to think so. And we didn't have a lot of money, we didn't have a lot of resources, but we didn't rely on kind of advertising and that side of it. The only advertising we had was Domino's, in fact, who used to give us free pizza when we were doing proofing sessions. And that was kind of it. But it was a really nice way as an entry point to journalism, and I kind of really fell in love with it from that point on. And then, I went on to study an NCTJ, which had very much had local news at the focus, core reporting and that side of it. And to me, it has a really key role to play in society. And kind of before I came into doing this ThinkIn, I did some research in the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport in October. I kind of looked at the press sector dynamics in the UK with kind of local journalism as a focus. And they found that local journalism has a key role to play in civil society, especially in things like local elections. They have a really, really key role. But part of the problems around it is market concentration, because there's these concentrated sectors of areas that are very heavily covered and areas that are not covered at all. We kind of talk about news deserts, these areas of the UK that don't see press. And kind of what we found over the pandemic is that there's a real need for it. We really want to know what's going on in our local area. We've had conversations before this ThinkIn with James Harding, who's one of the co-founders of Tortoise. People are very aware of their doorstep, either like clapping on it or, where their vaccination centre is now. So, this is kind of where I'm starting my thoughts on it. It has a real value in society, but are we approaching local in the right way? Are we doing the right things? Are we putting funding in the right places? So to kind of start the conversation, we've got Natalie Fahey here. She's the editor of Nottingham Live, Derbyshire Live, Lincolnshire Live, and their sister print publications. She's had a lot of experience across, local news services. And thank you for coming, Natalie, firstly.
Evening.
Everyone's very busy.
There's so many people here. It's brilliant.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And I think it just shows how engaged people are with the topic as well. So these, Nottingham Live, Derbyshire Live, Lincolnshire Live, I'm sure people have seen their equivalent lives in their area, is all kind of under Reach PLC. Reach have a big, have a big part of the local news scene in the UK. So if you could just kind of give us an understanding of how a Reach newsroom looks and feels, what are the priorities of Reach? What's the kind of stories that you guys are looking for when you come up in the morning, you have your editorial conference with your reporters.
Yeah.
What are you looking for? What are you looking for them to report on?
Yeah, well, first of all, just a little bit of background about myself. So I've been a journalist for 16 years. I started in local news and then I went to a specialist court reporting agency, Strand News, which I'm sure many of you know. And I did lots of shifts on the nationals. I worked for a German newspaper too, Bild Zeitung, for a year, mainly as London correspondent. And then I went back to the Nottingham Post and I've been there since 2012. So in August, as you quite rightly pointed out in your slides, there was a big restructure of Reach and I expanded my remit to take on Derbyshire and Lincolnshire as well. So that's a bit about me. I think the structure of the newsroom, yeah, it's totally different to how it was this time last year. So we were very, I would say, traditional before. We'd come into the office in the morning, everyone would sit there all day working on their stories to a news list. I mean, when I say traditional, in the digital sense of traditional, not print focused, we're very digital focused. And then, we were all told we had to go and work from home because of the pandemic hitting. And since then, we've been working via a virtual newsroom across Slack. We hold our conferences on Hangout every morning, and we work through a shared Google Doc, which everyone has access to. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. That's our publishing schedule. So how do we decide what's going to be, what content we're going to be producing every day? Well, it's always a really hard decision to decide what we're going to write about because we've only got limited resources. We're not a massive team. We're quite small actually, but it's a combination of what people are interested in, what people want to read. It's really important, and that changes all the time. It's changed so much over the past 10 years. What people expect from their local publications has completely changed. I think people are looking for more hyperlocal, niche content about what's really happening in their actual neighbourhood. And that's become really important over the past year or so when we look at tiers, all those kind of local restrictions, vaccination centres, all those kinds of things. What are the rules where you live and what can you do? What's happening with your local school and their bubble, for example? So all those kind of things, but also we are very, we know what our niche is and we want to stick to that. So our niche is Nottingham and Nottinghamshire for the Nottingham Post, it's Derby and Derbyshire for Derby Telegraph, Lincoln and Lincolnshire for the Lincolnshire website. So I just think as an editor, if you don't know what your niche is and what your brand is about and stick to that, what have you got left? If you start reporting on everything that's going on, you're not the Nottingham Post anymore, you're not Nottinghamshire Live. What have you got? What do you stand for? So it's really important to me to have those core values, but having those core values doesn't mean that we don't occasionally think, well, people might actually be interested in the Prince Harry interview, despite the fact that they live in a part of Nottingham. So we might just put an article out about that and, show that we're reflecting what's going on in the national news as well, because people are interested in that and we can't ignore that. But we've got our core values and we know what's important to us and what we should be reporting, and we stick to that really, rigidly. So that does also include councils, courts, all those kinds of things as well.
Yeah, so I kind of want to pick up on what you said in terms of, what people want to read, right? So how do you kind of gauge that? Because I know that I'm going to kind of have this conversation as well. Facebook plays a large part in how you kind of get your articles out there, that and getting into the content. Do you find that social media is a way that you've done that? Is it readability? Is it clicks? Like what kind of things are you using to measure what your audience wants?
Well, we look at a variety of sources really when we're looking at what people want to read. So we look at how popular articles have been in the past. That might be a particular follow-up. We look at what people are talking about, particular Facebook groups. So, neighbourhood groups that we're a part of, because the people who work on our publications live in those neighbourhoods. So they know what the issues are and what the important things are and what people are talking about, what they're worried about. As well as being journalists, we're humans as well. And we're people who live on those streets. So our concerns are probably the same as our readers. But we also look at what people are searching for on Google, and there's local search trends that people are looking into. So for example, when we're talking about Lincolnshire, people are searching for when is Butlins going to reopen, and that's really important to people. So why would we not write an article about that? Well, we do, but it's not the only thing we do. We do other stuff as well. But I think that that's the brilliant thing about journalism now, is that you've got so much information about what people want to read and what they're interested in, that you're probably more informed than you ever have been before. Back in the day when we just had print publications, we used to get quarterly marketing surveys where people would sort of lie about what they were interested in reading. You know, people always said, I want to see positive news on the front page. I don't personally believe that people do really want to just see positive news on the front page, because unfortunately, maybe James is going to disagree with me on that, but when we put a local crime on the front page or something, it always sells more copies. So maybe people don't want to be honest in those surveys. Now we're seeing the raw honesty of what people are really interested in.
Yeah, no, and I think so. There was a kind of similar study done for the Guardian where they asked Guardian region, they said, what would you like to hear about? They said environment stories. They put out environment stories and no one read them.
Yeah.
And you know, and it's that really hard boundary. So just thinking about that model, thinking about like that restructure, right? So there's quite a radical restructure that Reach did. You know, to me, when I look at your job title, I think that's a huge area. That's like a massive area to have an understanding of. You kind of see that as the future. So kind of almost like regional, national publications, basically. So kind of taking up those huge pockets. Is that where you kind of see public, like companies like Reach, companies like JPI, which I'm sure we can get into? Is that where we're going?
I don't think so, actually. I think we're going more local than ever, actually. I know my job title covers a really large area, but that's just the kind of areas I'm leading. And obviously I work with managers we've got managers in each newsroom. We've got quite a lot of managers in each newsroom. And then we've got reporters underneath them as well, who specifically only deal with those areas. So, you know, even though I'm covering quite a large area, I think for me and for Reach as well, local is more important than ever. But at the same time, we want to reflect some of those really big national stories that are also going on, because, you know, as people, you can quite honestly say, well, I live in Lincolnshire, I'm definitely interested in what the Queen might be doing or something, you know, so I'm not just kind of blinkered in my outlook.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, that's really interesting. And so if we can come to James Mitchinson. So James is a journalist for 20 years. He's editor of the Yorkshire Post. So and a little bit of an aside, I've got a little bit of a love for Yorkshire. I did my master's and went to DJ in Sheffield. So Yorkshire Post, you know, that was, but what was interesting to me is it was probably the first example I've seen of a Yorkshire paper having the local paper on the newsstand, and I probably saw people reading it just as much as I saw people reading the Times or the Guardian. So if you could just talk a little bit the same, you know, how is the Yorkshire Post running? You guys have done very well over the last year. You've kind of you've done very well at having that kind of Westminster eye, but also keeping an eye on Yorkshire. So yeah, so how's it been for the last year?
The last year's been horrific in many ways, but equally, you know, we've learned so much about our own capabilities. We've learned so much about what our communities want, and I don't disagree with what Natalie just said there about becoming more local than ever. To answer your question, how has the Yorkshire Post done? Our print decline is about -12, -13%, which is right up there with best in class in the industry. And our weekend edition is hovering around -3. Our weekend edition still selling around 37,000 copies. So the print edition, particularly our weekend edition, which has a significant chunk of lifestyle content in it, is faring really well in print. And digitally, our audiences continue to rise. But of course, that's tempered somewhat now, or at least we will begin to see that, because we're in the embryonic stages of a paywall. And the paywall is a great way to see what is important to people, to see what they're willing to pay for, and to address the question, how do you know what's important to people? You know, Natalie's so right. We've got so many data points now that we can use to triangulate the commissions, but always my view is that the work should be predicated upon that which enhances the communities it serves. So because we've got such a good, still and robust print sale, we have excellent postcode analysis. We're able to deep dive into the communities where we have good penetration and reach, and we are able to speak to those communities about what is important to them and what does matter to them, and we are able to then use that conversation, if you like, to inform our commissions. Yes, we have a lot of information about clicks and all the rest of it, but I've been on record several times stating my belief that if any publishers, local or otherwise, that are in thrall only to clicks are headed for a dark place with very few friends, is my view. So always we use as our sort of North Star, if you like, we must be creating content that is for the betterment of the communities it serves, rather than to satisfy the indiscriminate whims of a programmatic revenue paymaster.
Yeah. So which, I mean, clearly, like, I think that's really important. And Tortoise, for example, we don't rely on clicks, we rely on our membership model, but we still need members to come in. But so when you talk about that betterment of the community, to you, what does that mean? What does it mean to have the betterment of the community? Is it about that kind of local council scrutiny? Is it about reporting on crime? Is it reporting on the environment? Like, what are the kind of things that you look for in a story and you go, do you know what, that's hitting the mark, that's what we want to have, that betterment of the community?
There's no silver bullet, there's no sort of, there is no template for a story that does all of those things. It can be a feature on an artisan cheesemaker, somebody who set up a business with an entrepreneurial spirit, who is trying to make a go of things on their own. And an article in the Yorkshire Post brings them publicity, it brings them custom, it helps them. It could also be publishing truths that other people want suppressed. That is one of the sort of reasons we all come into the trade, isn't it? To speak truth to power and to utter those uncomfortable truisms that other people don't want in the public domain. And that's what journalists get a buzz from, isn't it? But equally, a newspaper like the Yorkshire Post, a local newspaper, is, if you like, a participant in the community. It's a member of the community, and it needs to behave in a way that the community deems acceptable and respectable. So, I share with my team that I think the tone and temperament of the Yorkshire Post is dictated as much by the way we conduct ourselves as it is our publishing plan. Because, as you've just said there, you see the Yorkshire Post being read at the newsstand alongside other titles. What we do, if you like, if you define local journalism and fetishize it, if you like, or patronize it, as sort of, if you just define it as what, so all journalism is the same sort of thing, rather than how. I like to think about how we produce our journalism and what motivates us to write the stories that we write. I'd like to think that the how is probably what compels people to trust us and to come to us for the news that they consume, rather than just the what, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And so trust is something that I think we can kind of come on to. So, and we'll come to Zav in a second on the slides, because he kind of goes into that a little bit about trust, and especially in the news. So, on the Yorkshire Post website, I just had a quick look through everyone who's come tonight, through your like front pages, what kind of things you're working on. And the first thing that comes up is news you can trust since 1754, right? Which that's a big claim. That's a very big, solid claim. And I know there's backing. I know you guys have won awards for this. But what do you think garners that? What means that you have people that trust you, that are loyal to you? Because I think, and I don't think it's wrong to say, there's been, everything we've seen with Meghan Markle, there is a lack of trust in some of the national newspapers, and also in some of the local newspapers. I don't think it's exclusive to that. So how do you have people that come towards news with that trust? Because then again, that's important, because if they trust the publication, then they're likely to be more engaged in their local community because they see the value in it.
Yeah, totally. So there is a great definition of trust by a US academic called Friedman, and he says that trust results from people feeling protected, connected, and respected. And we've built our content plan predicated upon those three pillars, if you like. And if you sort of drop synonyms from protected and connected and respected, it's about being valued, it's about feeling engaged, it's about feeling part of something. And you know, if you sort of unpick trust, what does trust mean? Why is it important? It is, if you like, the catalyst for people to enter into contracts with the unknown, sometimes with people who they don't know necessarily, but they come to trust them and therefore enter into, you know, a transaction with them, whether it be an emotional transaction or a financial transaction or whatever it might be. But when you enter into that contract with people, that, as with any contract, there are T's and C's in the contract, you know, and people expect us to undertake journalism without fear or favour, with no agenda. And something I brought to the Yorkshire Post. So when I took the editorship of the Yorkshire Post, I said to, you know, the senior management at the time that I wanted the Yorkshire Post journalism to be defined on, you know, by notions of right and wrong, not right and left. And the Yorkshire Post is historically, I think the audience will probably know, the Yorkshire Post is historically and traditionally a right-leaning, conservative supporting broadsheet newspaper. And I didn't necessarily feel comfortable with producing journalism that had that agenda. So I do think when people subscribe, when they are committed to being loyal readers and hopefully advocates for the newspaper, there are certain things there are certain boundaries that we must not cross. And instinctively, you know that, for example, if you put a listicle on a website that says the 20 worst places to live in X, if you think you can do that without consequence, without those people who live in those places, who are proud to live in those places, coming back at you with some heat, then I think you're sorely mistaken.
And I think that's interesting, because I think there is often situations where we put political leaning as kind of the agenda over, and it sounds like more the agenda when you have a local paper is you can put the local community as the agenda, and then that kind of removes some of those problems. But I think that it can always be more complicated than that. But if we could go to Zav with the slides, we're just going to come to that, and then we're going to come to our other two speakers, Megan Lucero and also Tamoya, who comes from Gouda, and we can kind of dig into that a little bit more, into those relationships between trust and community.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
Perfect. Yeah, so I'll just whiz through these because being in the chat, lots of people have stuff to say, so I don't want to take up too much time. So I think I'll start with something which is actually what seems to be good news. So Press Gazette measures the net loss of local newspapers across the UK. And actually, despite the latest figures covering more than a year, so January 2019 to August 2020, the decline of local newspapers has actually slowed down in the past couple of years. So JPI Media closed the greatest numbers, so they closed 13, I think, and then Reach and Tyndall closed 7 papers each. I suppose one possible explanation for the decline slowing is that the furlough scheme might actually have helped kind of keep some local newspapers going that might have otherwise gone under, or it may be that the papers have managed to kind of transition to digital better. So I would like to hear from the other speakers at some point to try and explain why that decline has slowed. Then if we go to the second slide, so this is all data provided by Reach in their latest annual reports. Obviously, Reach owns a lot of papers and news websites across the UK, and I think it gives a kind of good reflection of what some of the conversations which went on in the green room and which are going on now. It gives a good reflection of that conversation, which is that people aren't really perfect consumers, in the sense that lots of us don't necessarily read in a way that creates value anymore. So you can see for Reach that they had a rise in digital revenue, they had a rise in readership last year, and yet they still had quite a big fall in overall revenue, and in July last year, they said they had to cut 500 jobs. And if you look at a kind of couple of other sites across the UK, so Bishop Stortford Independent saw its web audiences increase massively between January and October 2020. Nottinghamshire Live, I'm not sure about their revenue, but I believe that April 2020 had their biggest month ever. So in terms of readership, lots of these local places are doing well. It's just the linking that to revenue, which is obviously one of the big issues. And then if we go to the broader picture into the next slide. So this is, I think, interesting because it seems to suggest that the UK places less value on local papers than some other countries do. I think one of the reasons you could posit for why that's the case is that we get our local news actually from all sorts of places. So the Reuters Institute did a kind of digital report last summer, and they asked people in the UK what platform they used most often to get their local news content. 39% said it was television, 17% said it was social media, and just 10% said it was printed newspapers. And it was interesting, James Harding, our editor, talking before about how local newspapers used to, fundamentally be something which provided information. And I think for as much as we have the conversation about social media and things like Facebook groups and how they're occupying some of the space which local newspapers might have occupied, there's also next door, there's Facebook Marketplace, there's the weather app on your phone. I think there's lots of ways in which the internet can kind of siphon away some of those readers. And then if we whiz to the next slide. So just a quick one on this. The interesting fact here is that when you ask people of different education levels whether they're really interested in politics, really interested in news, really interested in local news, you'll find that for politics and for news, it's the most highly educated people who are the most interested. But in the UK, at least, when it comes to local news, it's the people who are lower educated who are most interested in local news. So clearly, there's certain groups for whom the loss of local news will be kind of more keenly felt. And then finally, I'll leave you with this, I think, very positive note, which is in that same report, Reuters Institute looked at trust in local newspapers compared to some of the national outlets, and local newspapers as a whole are the most trusted print product behind the Financial Times. So clearly people still put a lot of faith in them. And that's everything.
Great, thanks, Zav. And I think we can kind of talk a little bit more about the priorities that people have in terms of news. But if we can come to Megan Lucero, who's director of the Bureau Local, it's a collaborative local investigations team under the nonprofit Bureau of Investigative Journalism. I'd really recommend you checking them out. And you guys had a pretty big day today, so I think we can kind of delve into that. So if you could just give a little bit of an intro into what the Bureau Local is, because I think if you're involved in journalism, you've probably heard of them and you have an idea of where you guys sit, but if you haven't, it's hard to explain. So you could do that and maybe talk a little bit about the tribunal that came through today.
Yeah, of course. Well, thanks for having me. So Bureau Local is a collaborative people-powered network to speak to this kind of local accountability that's needed across the UK. And we were set up over 4 years ago, the recognition of everything you're talking about now, which is this real concern about the news deserts, about the gaps, about what's kind of happening at space. So loads of us came together to say, like, how can we show solidarity with each other, with our industry? Because we believe everyone deserves access to local information and that local investigative reporting is important. So our approach is purely collaborative. It's about how can we build a network where we share public interest investigations and open up data and open up access to information. So we take on big projects. We look at underreported stories that need really a kind of deep dive that maybe a lot of local newsrooms may not have the capacity to do. We coordinate and work with local newsrooms, active citizens, engaged kind of groups. We publicly, openly, transparently investigate these things. And our team does the kind of stuff that a lot of newsrooms might not have, again, capacity for: investigative resource, data journalism resource, kind of that coordinated effort. And then we break those stories, and we aim to kind of have sort of national and local impact. And like what James was saying earlier really speaks a lot to us, because we really think about how we do our journalism, not just kind of what it is that we're producing. So we have a commitment to kind of decolonizing the news. We have a commitment to doing engaged, deep journalism that builds kind of greater trust. And that's kind of what we do in coordination with everyone. And what you alluded to today is our tribunal case. So for years, we've been reporting on council finances and what happens in local government. This has been an area that a lot of newsrooms had cuts in. And in part of that investigation, we came across this incredible story about a council in Essex. We were digging through spreadsheets and spreadsheets. We found this council had borrowed £1 billion from other councils around the country. We're basically just taking out loans everywhere. And they were launching this huge investment program, but none of it is in the public eye. So you don't know who they borrowed from, what they invested in. But through some investigative reporting, we were able to find out some of these really controversial schemes that we reported about. But we took them to the Information Tribunal to try to get that, because they refused our FOI. It kind of went all the way to a tribunal case. And after 18 months today, we were able to announce that we've won our case, and the council will have to tell us and the rest of the public where this £1 billion come from, who they borrowed it from, what they've invested in. We know that 150 local authorities, councils across the country have contributed to it. The security of those investments are in question. How that affects people's services, how that affects just this ripple-on effect is going to be quite huge. So again, for us, taking on something like this, a coordinated big kind of case like this, is really important, again, to be sharing the kind of fight for transparency for newsrooms around the country. So this approach of what kind of shared infrastructure, how can collaboration actually deepen the way that we stand with each other to make sure that local news can kind of happen, local information can get out on the ground. And this year we're going to be launching an expansion, or we'll be looking into an expansion of this. So like I say, currently we think what investigations can be shared, what data can be shared, what public interest campaigns can we run, but we'll be looking at how can we share the sustainability question. So this question that we're all talking about, it's super important. Yeah. Deep, genuine, community-led trust is so important. How can we make sure that this continues? So the Bureau is going to be looking at what other elements can be shared to help this fight continue.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, and clearly, so council finances is clearly something that a lot of people are not going to want to just sit down and go through. And when I did my TJ training, we kind of had to sit down and do that, and you had to sit down and go through a council agenda, that these epic documents, and it's a real skill, and it's a real talent. My question is, like Bureau Local's done some fantastic work, it's done some, and completely and credit to it, but the issue is that there's still going to be some limitations to that. So what needs to happen to allow that kind of collaborative journalism to kind of continue out of Bureau Local? Because I was kind of looking around on your website, and clearly there's limitations. When a newsroom cuts employees, when a local newspaper disappears, that can really impact one of your investigations. So is it about government intervention? Is it about governments kind of subsidizing and supporting local news in these endeavors? Or is it something else? Like how can we make sure that this is happening? Because I think it is really important, and it's frustrating to me that it's not happened before. How is it we've got to this point that councils didn't have to reveal those finances, which seems baffling to me.
Yeah, and exactly. And as you say, we've looked at several things outside of this. So our other big project was our Dying Homeless project. No one had been recording the deaths of those who were dying homeless. And we essentially crowdsourced it from newsrooms and citizen organizations around the country. And that led to the government now recording homeless deaths for the first time, which is really important. So it does go beyond, I just wanted to make sure, it does go beyond the kind of nitty gritty of sitting through budget documents. We're currently investigating Deliveroo's pay at the moment. We just did a big piece on Amazon as well. So we do these kind of wide ranging pieces. But your point is so your question is so poignant to this real challenge. We've seen this over the past 4 years. It just breaks my heart that like the partners and collaborators we've been working with, watching those newsrooms shut down, watching people say we don't have the capacity. So that project I just spoke about, that what we're looking at is like, how do we invest in people that are deeply rooted in their communities to sustain this? What can we share? How can we kind of make this happen? But in the kind of meantime, Bureau Local has morphed because of this kind of phenomenon as well. And I think has made our journalism better for it. So like when we say we collaborate, we truly genuinely need it in every facet of how we work. We're not just here to kind of, hey, can you run our story? And we just try to broadcast this out. Like every element of what we do is kind of open and shared. So we recognize that journalism is just one piece inside of this civic infrastructure that makes change happen. And so we pull on all levers of that. Our network is now not just reporters. Our network is people who care about local storytelling, about accountability, about local access to information. So once upon a time, those were journalists. The journalists used to be the key engaged member of a community that made sure those things got out. But increasingly, there are other kind of people that are stepping up. We're partnering with all kinds of organizations, from academic universities and academic institutions to local charities and groups and civic spaces. It's about kind of finding where those pockets are and kind of building on them. So, but I think your wider question of how do we crack this whole thing is, I'm going to come back and sound like a broken record, but it's not one single solution. It is going to need a coalition of multiple ideas and multiple approaches. Plurality is so important. All of us as journalists know this. You need plurality in any market that you're investigating. Our industry needs it. We need diverse media ownership. We need diverse newsrooms. We need different approaches to all this. So yes, I think governments need to be looking at charitable status for newsrooms so that they can kind of benefit from that relief. That's a fight happening with a group of people fighting for charitable status. There's been some comments in the group here around micropayments. This is one kind of experiment that's happening. There's the cooperative model. What we do is a kind of philanthropic model, looking at where can philanthropy come in and invest in this. But like any other space, you need investment. You need a runway. Most of the funding at the moment is like, let me give you £2 to crack this whole thing. And also, by the way, find a sustainable model for it. And also it has to be done in 3 months. And we have to think differently about this. Like we have to think about it like any other industry that needs like that groundswell. So we need investment. We need long-term investment. We need government approaching this. We need our community organizations, businesses approaching this. I think we need to kind of do this from a unified effort. No single one of us is going to crack it. We can all be bringing different things to the table.
Yeah, and that's fascinating. And I think the point you made about plurality is really important. It's about those diversity of papers. It's about having, multiple papers, like having the Yorkshire Post and Nottingham and Reach and JPI and this paper and this paper and this paper, and that's what we're kind of missing. So if we and come to Moya, so Moya Nottingham McLean, she's politics editor of Galdem, which is a really brilliant publication, online publication that kind of focus on marginalized voices, and is doing a lot of great work on diversifying newsrooms and doing a lot of great work on changing that narrative. So I'm kind of interested to hear from you, Moya, like what kind of role do you see publications like Galdem in this? Because when we were talking about this question beforehand in our team, we were kind of looking and thinking, do we need to rethink local geographically? Can local mean online communities? Because I go, because I'm in part of the LGBT community, I go to LGBT publications to look for that news, but and where does that fit in, and where does kind of Galdem fit in that those kind of narratives of a new kind of local, if you want to call it that?
Yeah, sure. I just want to say, first of all, I was nodding along to everything Megan said, so thank you for that, especially about the plurality. So the way I would describe Galdem is, rather than local, I'd use grassroots, and I think that might be a useful way to frame it. So we do have a print publication, but we're mostly digital, online, and that is also testament to the sort of disappearance of opportunities at a grassroots level and within the local community, which mean that our writers, who are usually, we amplify the voices of people of colour from marginalised genders, who are less likely to be able to enter the industry anyway because of, the existing barriers, obstacles, but also because as it gets tighter, the people who are on the fringes are less likely to be able to get in there. So we provide a platform online for them, and that's why I think, we seem like we're doing what is local. The way I describe it is, we already have a certain freedom because we're working outside a mainstream audience. So we have the ability to pursue stories that might not have like a massive readership, but we think are of importance to get out there and come from perspectives that may not be shared within mainstream media. We're not expected to sell copies every week, and our financial model works with a mix of subscribers. We have investors who understand our mission. That is that investment that Megan was talking about, sort of that long-term vision, the knowledge that you're not immediately going to get a return, and that you don't have to sack like 20 staff and close down the newsroom if you don't get those returns. They've invested for the long haul. They want to see the project through. And we also have arts grants. So that's sort of the main outline of how Gowden works. We mostly work with young writers, and so we were working on, I would say, a skeleton staff. I came on board in November, and after we managed to reopen our furlough, etc. And so, as the politics editor, something I'm really trying to do is sort of build those local connections. It probably helps if I say a bit about myself. So I almost worked backwards. So I came from a really rural area in the West Midlands, a place called Herefordshire. One of my earliest brushes with local news was not being able to get work experience at the local newspaper because they just didn't have the capacity, and it was so oversubscribed. So from sort of early, it was almost like those local news channels were very closed off, because I'm of a generation where we'd already seen the impact on sort of I guess the disappearing diversity of ownership. So, you had local news, job roles were going, the newsrooms were getting smaller. I would advise anyone who hasn't already to read Flat Earth News by Nick Davis, which outlines this really, really helpfully. So I then went to London and I started working on nationals. So national new media companies like Vice is where I cut my teeth. Then I went to work for places like the BBC, the Independent, and I sort of worked backwards to Gowden and was like, there is something wrong with the pipeline that goes to national news. And that is that I think local news has been very much, if not cut out of the equation, the voice of local news doesn't reach into the nationals the way it should be doing. So when I got to Gowden, immediately I was like, I want to reach out to we have these marginalized voices we're already platforming, but people outside of London, people in the rural areas, people's in communities outside who fit within that group anyway. So they're sort of doubly invisible. So something that, obviously, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. So something we're trying to do is partner with community organizations, because on the ground already, they have, that reach into that community, they have that trust that we talked about that's so important. So, places like, I'll name a few, like New Writing North or Migrant Voice in the West Midlands. These are organizations who can both feed us a pipeline of young aspiring writers that we can support and sort of help get their first byline, so they can then begin working with other outlets who might not have the time to devote to doing that initial guidance because they don't have, the funding or the money, and they're just too busy. Like, we're not a newsroom in the sense of news churn. We're a newsroom in the sense that we can sit with something for ages because we're that small outlet. So we work with these community organizations who can give us those people, but also they can trust us to tell stories from their area. So they give us that information. And we have, because of the way, I guess, because we're providing for this audience, they already trust us quite a lot. So we have this really loyal readership that knows that they can, give us tips or say, this is happening in my area and we want you to report on this. Sometimes we might not have the capacity to do that because we are a really small outlet and we do punch above our weight, but then we will also try and link them up with other people. So we're trying to think in new ways, and we've just sort of begun. We're very young. It was started in 2015, the publication, but we're already making quite a lot of headway, and it's very exciting. But I would say that the primary thing is investment. Like, Gowden is an island, and other newsrooms that I've been in, one of the main things I would say is that the lack of money is so prevalent in that every year it almost seems like the staff roles are getting smaller and smaller, and journalists are stretched across an even bigger patch. They don't have time to train up young journalists, and they don't have the funding to. The traineeships are gone. I think it's something like between 2013 and 2015, 98% of journalists who started their career had a BA, like they had a degree, but those sort of like journalism as a vocation that you could start as training at 16 and just go forward, that's disappeared. You're now expected to go to university for 3 years and train, and then you don't have a guaranteed job at the end. So that model as well, that depends on like the nationals to give employment and training, it's making the pool even smaller. So yeah, I would say that's the main outline of the stuff we kind of do and the way we look at it.
Yeah, and I think you raised an interesting point about your experience in nationals and how they don't play into those local stories. So we had a brief chat about it on Clubhouse, but something that I've been thinking about and I've been chatting to my mum about, because we've been talking kind of about sexual assault in the wake of Sarah Everard, is that there's a lot of reports coming out from schools. There's lots of reports coming out from schools and sixth forms saying that there is accounts of sexual harassment. And, you know, in a national paper, you can kind of give a little bit of space to that, but you can't give a lot of time. You're not going to have time to sit down and go through every single school and kind of go through those details. So it sounds like to you, Gautam, not necessarily that you would report on that, but you have more of a space to do that and to link up. But how do you think national publications can do better by doing that? How do you think that they can play into those local communities and use that to their advantage? Because from what the conversation we've had across the board, local is the answer, because it's beneficial to everyone. Like that seems really clear, but I think we're maybe using it in the wrong way, and it's being situated in the wrong way in society.
Well, I'd say that my answer is sort of twofold. I think that just from my experience within national newsrooms, I think that too often national newsrooms are sort of seen as the unimpeachable model. So instead of focusing on what local news is doing and the sort of patches they're building up and trying to copy that model, they think that local news should be in the model of the national news. But I would also say that it is a case of like time. Journalists in national newsrooms, and I think this is obviously the same in local newsrooms because the patches are even bigger, but they don't have time. You would be expected to churn out quite a lot of stories. You don't have the time to build up your patch. You don't have time to build a community, and that is simply because those roles have got smaller. So you're expected to do more with less staff. So for the national, it's interesting. I would also encourage like people at national newspapers to read local news more. And I can't speak for everyone. I just know that, again, that was something that I noticed. It would be sort of like pulling news from the wire agencies like all the time, or pulling news from social media. And that again is a time issue. It's because there isn't the time, but you'd be expected to sort of like churn through social media, see what the top lines were. And then everyone's just reporting the same sort of news. Whereas, so something I'm trying to do at Gautam is build a database of local news titles so that the team can check them every morning. And the thing is with that's a really simple thing to do, but it does take a bit of time, just putting all the national news titles in, making sure you've got them. And it's not obviously like, it's not saying that, no, local news, sorry, it's local news titles, putting all the local news titles in and making sure you've got them. But it's not saying that local news is, you know, unimpeachable and that it's all perfect and all the reporting is brilliant, but it is giving you more of that hyper specific local focus. And I think too often the way, because of the lack of time, reporting works at the moment is you'll look at what's, you know, some will look at what's being reported in The Guardian, or they get a press release and they'll be like, okay, we're reporting that. But that press release has gone out to every single national newspaper and they're all reporting the same story. So it's projects like the local news and also like the Bureau Local who have that time to go out into communities and devote, you know, work on something. That is the most important thing. So I'd say it's hard to criticize the national newspapers because on the one hand, I think I can see what's, you know, going wrong. But on the other hand, it is a case of lack of investment and time. So there's a lot of really excellent reporters working on titles who just don't have the time to devote to these patches. So it's really difficult. And I don't want to sort of like be like, they're terrible, because they're not. They just are working in difficult circumstances. But it is, again, it's the lack of plurality in ownership and brief. And it's the lack of sort of the space to do the work.
Yeah. No, and I think you're right, and I think everyone can agree that that time and that space, and something that I think we're really lucky at Tortoise is that we do have, you know, even as much as we try and have the time you know, we have these think-ins. We had a conversation, for example, on our hidden homicides file. You know, we had a conversation in the think-in, and then months later we had the file, and that was a huge project that we had time for. But, you know, even we don't always have the time to do that. So we're kind of fast approaching 7:30. So I kind of want to go to a couple of people from the chat. So I know that Matty Edwards is here from Bristol Cable, which we might come to him in a minute. Bristol Cable is a really interesting community-led kind of news organisation in Bristol. And Karen Key, I think, has been really active in the chat talking about US news, which I think is a very different model. You know, they don't have those national papers in the same way. You know, New York Times is read nationally, Washington Post, but it's a very different model of journalism. So if we can come to Matty first. Hi, Matty, thanks for joining us. Hi. So I just wanted to see like what your thoughts were and kind of where you guys are sitting. So I'm sure Zav can put a link to Bristol Cable in the chat. You guys are doing some really interesting stuff. So if you could just give it like a tiny little bit of background to Bristol Cable and kind of your thoughts on the discussion so far. You know, is that resonating with you guys, or is it sitting differently?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the Bristol Cable is quite a small, young title. We were founded in 2014 by a bunch of volunteers in Bristol. So we're quite young, but we now have 2,400 members. That's what's unique about the cable. We are a cooperative entirely owned by our members. So we have this really engaged audience who pay on average about £3.50 a month to have a say in the direction of the organisation. They can come to our AGM and have a say on decision making and give a steer to what we're working on in the year to come. But they've also input on the stories that we're working on and vote on editorial campaigns, for example. But yeah, mainly they see that the journalism that we produce is worth supporting. So it's free at the point of access, but funded by membership. And that model has held pretty steady during COVID, which has been great. You know, we're reaching more people now than ever, and our income from membership has remained steady, unlike some other titles who are more reliant on advertising. But what our model allows us to do is, in a similar way to Tortoise, really, we kind of are trying to take a bit of a step back from the slightly crazy daily news cycle and dedicate resources to long-term investigative reporting. So, for example, last year, I spent a number of months reporting on problems at the local psychiatric hospital in Bristol, which is run by the Priory Group, a large private company. And so that's really what is unique about the cable. Our membership model allows us to do that kind of long-term investigative work that supplements the daily reporting that other titles in Bristol are doing already. Yeah, I mean, there are so many good points to pick up on that other people have made so far, but I think trust is probably one of the main ones, really. I mean, we have 2,400 members, so we have this audience around the city who are engaged with what we do, and engagement is a really important part of what we do. So last year we've tried out new ways of gathering expertise from across our membership and tagging people and creating this resource for journalists to tap into when looking at stories. We're also about to launch quite a big engagement project with the local elections coming up in Bristol to ask our members and also our audience about what issues they want candidates in the election to be talking about. So hopefully we're going to produce a citizens agenda based on, you know, responses from hundreds of our members and readers. So what we try and do is, as much as possible, base ourselves in local communities. We've done public events in the past, which obviously aren't happening at the moment, but what we try and do is have those deep relationships with our members so that they feel that they can trust us, they can come to us with stories, and also act as kind of ambassadors for us in the city. Yeah, there's so much to pick up on, but that's a bit of an overview about what the cable does.
But it does sound similar to Tortoise in a way, but on a more local level, right? So that is that engagement, which is why we run the ThinkIns, is that we really encourage people to kind of get involved. And I've been like catching up with the chat, but there's like far too much. And I know people have shared some really great links and emails as well. So if we could come to Karen Key and just kind of hear her perspective from the US side, if that's possible. Hi, Karen. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks so much. So this has been a great conversation. I wanted to say, coming from the US, the media landscape here is really dystopian, and it's a huge country. Most of the local outlets are really struggling. Most of the local news stations are being bought up by a right-wing conglomerate, Sinclair. And so we really struggle with most folks looking for news on social media. And what I was commenting on in the chat is that I do a lot of work around helping officials. That would be in what we call human services. So that's, you might call it social services, affordable housing, working with people experiencing homelessness, experiencing poverty, to change the narrative, because it's a very destructive narrative in the US about how much everyone is to blame for their circumstances, a lack of understanding of systemic and structural forces. The problem is getting a productive narrative in front of people, because people are consuming their media on social media, and the trending topics are always the most frightening and upsetting because of how the brain works, right? And because of how AI is functioning to affect the feed. So I put in the chat a great tool to show side by side what Facebook is showing Democrats and Republicans in their feed. And I guess the main point I would make too is that this is opaque to most Americans. They don't understand how these platforms work. And so they see it as a neighborhood. And here's how we end up with something like QAnon, where people move further and further down a rabbit hole of conspiratorial thinking that is challenged because they think other people believe this to be true. And the other people are people that are in their little echo chamber, and also bots. So it's really disturbing. And in my work, I'm trying to bring some of the experts together across disciplines to take this to officials around the country. And I actually joined Tortoise because this is exactly what I would like to do, is to have a forum like this, using technology to actually have real thoughtful conversations. And so I'm a consultant. I've talked with my clients about, look at Tortoise. This is the kind of thing we should be seeking funding for, to try to create in the US, because we need the opportunity to have people have an actual conversation that isn't about how it's monetized and how it's shaped by the platform. So that I just wanted to, that's kind of a perspective from the US.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think what kind of comes down to there is that bipartisan politics and the lack of plurality. If you only have one source of news, of course you're going to believe that one source of news. So we're rapidly approaching the 7:30. So if we I'm going to just like push over like slightly by a little bit, because I just want to come back to James and I want to come back to Natalie and kind of hear from you guys and kind of see where the conversations go on, and any reflections you have on the conversation around locals. So if we go to Natalie first, if that's okay.
Yeah, sorry, I had trouble with the mute button there. I'm fine.
No, that's all right.
Yeah, that's such an interesting discussion, and I've been sort of making a few notes about things I agreed with or disagreed with, and but I think one of the main things that's sort of come through for me this evening is I think people have got kind of old-fashioned views about local news, and I'm quite shocked by that. I don't know if that's a controversial thing to say, but I'm just going to say it anyway. No offense to anyone at all. I mean, Reach is taking on, we recognise the difficulties with the industry and the things we struggled with in the past. We are taking on apprentices, people who've got no experience in journalism. We've got one in the Nottingham newsroom right now. We are recruiting more people from diverse backgrounds, and we do still take on people in work who do work experience as well. We've got extremely close relationships with universities in all our cities, and we're embarking on a sort of Harken style project with a load of journalism students at the moment at Nottingham Trent University. So I think it was Megan that said about the collaboration and the partnership kind of thing that needs to happen for local news to thrive and survive. And I totally agree with that. I am interested in all kinds of partnerships and collaborations I can do in my local area, working with students, working with other publications. You know, we have people from the local democracy reporter scheme as well, which is another collaboration, Facebook reporters, we've got Google Showcase reporters. All these things are helping to make our industry stronger, and I think that's probably the future. So that was my sort of reflection on that bit. It was also funny that someone said, oh, I did local news work experience and I had to ring up the police every time a siren went past. Well, we don't do that anymore. But the trust thing is something that's come through really clearly tonight as well. And people have problems with trusting the media now. They've got really big problems with it because there's so many sources of news out there. Nextdoor, people have been talking about that. Well, who trusts Nextdoor? Does anyone trust Nextdoor? I don't. Do people trust what they see in Facebook groups? I think that's where publications like my own and lots of the others featured on this call tonight set themselves apart, because we are trained journalists.
Yeah.
We're quite open with our credentials and where we've come from and what we do. And also, we quite often take the time to explain the processes behind what's happened, which is only a recent thing because of the lack of trust.
Yeah.
But, you know, when we shut down and we worked from home because of the pandemic, I wrote an open letter to the readers. When we have inquests up on the website, quite often we'll put a fact box in saying this is why we report on inquests, because people don't understand those kind of democratic processes that are going on, and they don't understand why you're allowed to go in and report on someone's death.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're doing lots of things to increase trust, recognizing that there is a lack of trust.
Yeah.
But I think by doing that, that is helping. At least I hope it's helping. I think it's helping. But of course, there are always going to be people that don't trust us, of course.
Yeah. No. That's really interesting. I think, you know, there's a lot to work from. So James, I'm gonna be really cruel and just, you know, we've got maybe like in a minute, like where you sit, and I think maybe come back to the protected, respected, and connected, and whether or not you're feeling positive about where news is going, and remembering that this is a conversation with people who are very engaged in this conversation, and like making sure that it's brought outside of this room.
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure I can do it in a minute, but I'll do my best.
Me too. That's fine.
Well, so I mean, it concerns me greatly that the conversation sort of polarizes national and local as if, you know, one's good and one's bad, and as if they are sort of, you know, incompatible ways of doing journalism. That they're not. I think, you know, somebody said on the call, we're digital first, we're digitally focused, and I try to ask my team not to worry about the platforms where their journalism will be consumed, but to worry about how good their journalism is. So, you know, I asked the team to focus on the quality of the content and consider the contribution that ultimately their journalism will make. And I think by thinking about the journalism in that way, you know, there is no need to polarize the debate or sort of, you know, infantilize the challenge, as it were, falling into the Twitter trap of you having to be in one tribe or the other, or otherwise, you know, and defend it with a pitchfork. I think that the more we get into the intricacies and the nuance of what good journalism really is, I think all the better. Am I feeling positive? In the email you sent me when you invited me to this, there was a question there about, you know, has the business model been destroyed? And I thought to myself, well, it's. I suppose if you're one of those that thought the local publishers were an immovable monolith and all of their revenue streams, you know, unshakable monopolies that would last forever, then yeah, the business model probably has been destroyed if that's how you think about local publishing. But I'd rather think of it as having changed. I think the business model has changed. I think we've had to diversify our newsrooms. We've had to think really creative and innovatively about how we build our teams and what the skill sets are that we require in those teams. And, you know, if I may, I think if we get this right and we get our priorities right as publishers and use data intelligently and listen to our audiences, think about what people are willing to pay for, what kind of journalism they're willing to pay for, then we can create more relevant journalism. We can have it resonate more loudly in the communities that we serve. And I think we can make ourselves more indispensable than ever, and continue to stand out as journalism that really can be trusted, because it is, just to go back to my point at the top of the call, for the betterment of the communities it serves.
Yeah, And I completely agree, and I can see some really positive messages in the chat with people sharing contact information, and maybe we can kind of support that afterwards and kind of increase that collaboration. So I'm going to be very, very quick because I've definitely gone over time, and I'm sure I will be in trouble for it. But just to say, this has been really, really fascinating. It's kind of opened my eyes to new ways, and there's things I'm definitely going to do. For example, I'm going to start reading local news publications in the same way that I run through all of my national news publications in the morning. I'm going to really think about those kind of key pillars about investment for community, and think about digital and local, and try and rethink that. And I'm sure people in the Tortoise Newsroom are really going to think about what local means and how we can kind of work with places like Bristol Cable, who are doing similar models to us, but on a more local community level. But thank you everyone for joining. I hope you've really enjoyed it. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about rivers in England, a completely different conversation, but equally fascinating. And yeah, have a great evening all.